They found it on the third day of excavation for the new Pinewood Mall, just 20 feet down, beneath decades of dirt and forgotten history. A concrete bunker, not on any of the city plans or blueprints, not in any records. "Cold War relic," said Frank Tillman, the site foreman. "Probably one of those fallout shelters from the 60s, back when everybody thought the Russians were going to drop the big one." I wasn't so sure. My name's Ray Chambers, county historian and hobbyist archaeologist. They called me in when they found the bunker, standard procedure for unexpected historical finds. Something about it felt wrong from the start. For one thing, it was big. Not your standard family hideaway with a few cots and some canned beans. This was government-sized, and the door, solid steel, a foot thick, had been sealed from the inside. "How'd they get out?" asked Manny, one of the younger workers, voicing what we were all thinking. Nobody had an answer. Not then. It took specialized equipment to cut through that door. When it finally swung open, the air that rushed out was cold. Not stale like you'd expect from 60 years of being sealed, but cold. And it smelled like copper, like old pennies, like blood. Inside was a room full of telephone equipment, old-fashioned switchboards, miles of copper wire coiled and tangled like snakes frozen in mid-strike. Rotary phones lined the walls, dozens of them, their black surfaces dulled with age but somehow not dusty. Emergency communications center, I guessed, for when the bombs fell. The workers were already losing interest, disappointed it wasn't full of gold bars or government secrets. Only Tillman and I ventured further inside, flashlights sweeping across the control panels. That's when we heard it. A sound so faint you could almost convince yourself it wasn't there. A pulse, rhythmic, steady. Thump, 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 thump. Generators still running, Tillman suggested, but there was doubt in his voice. We followed the sound to the back of the room, where the wires were thickest. There, the copper strands had formed something like a nest. No, not a nest. An organ. A mass of twisted, coiled wire that seemed to contract and expand slightly with each pulse. Thump, 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 like a heart beating. "What the hell is that?" Tillman whispered. Before I could answer, every phone in the bunker rang at once. A shrill, demanding chorus that made us both jump. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. "Power surge," I said, not believing it myself. "Let's get out of here." They posted a security guard that night. Young guy named Peterson. Found him the next morning sitting in his truck, staring straight ahead, not blinking, not responding to questions, just repeating the same phrase over and over. "The lines are open now. The lines are open now." They took him to County General. Catatonic, the doctors said. Shock, maybe, or some kind of gas leak in the bunker. But I knew better. I'd taken one of those old phones, slipped it into my bag before we left. Just for the Historical Society, I told myself. It rang that night, 3 a.m. No cord, no connection, but it rang. When I answered, there was only static at first, then voices. Dozens of overlapping voices, all talking at once, panicked, frightened. "They're coming. Can't get through to Washington. Missiles in the air. God help us all." Cold War panic, captured somehow in those copper wires. The last desperate calls of people thinking the world was ending. But then one voice cut through clearer than the rest. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is Lieutenant Robert Dawson, October 27th, 1962. We've lost contact with command. Radar shows incoming. Please advise. Please. October 27th, 1962. The height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The day we came closest to nuclear war. This is "This is Ray Chambers," I said, not knowing what else to do. "It's 2025. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real. There was no attack." Silence. Then, 2025? That's not possible. "The crisis ended peacefully," I continued. Both sides backed down. More silence. Then, a sound like wire scraping against wire. "You're lying," the voice said, suddenly different, colder. "The calls keep coming in, thousands of them. Last calls, last words, last breaths. The world ended, Mr. Chambers. We're just the echo." I hung up, threw the phone across the room. The next day, I learned that 3 more people had visited the bunker. The project architect, 2 engineers, all 3 now in the hospital, all 3 repeating different fragments of emergency calls from 1962. I went back to the bunker. Had to. Something was happening that defied explanation, but I needed to try. The mass of wires had grown, spread across the floor, up the walls, pulsing stronger now. Thump, 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 thump. And I realized the truth. This wasn't just equipment that had somehow recorded old messages. This was something else, something alive. When they built this bunker, they filled it with copper wire, the best conductor available. Miles of it, connecting to phone lines that reached across the country. And on that day, in October 1962, when everyone thought the world was ending, those wires carried something more than electrical signals. They carried fear, desperation, the collective panic of thousands of people making what they thought were their final calls. All that emotion, all that energy, with nowhere to go when the bunker was sealed. It stayed in the copper, condensed, evolved. And now it was awake. One of the phones on the wall rang. I answered. "You came back," said the voice that wasn't Lieutenant Dawson anymore. "Good. We have so many calls to complete." "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the last conversations, the unfinished goodbyes, the warnings never delivered. For 60 years we've been waiting, growing, remembering. Remembering what? How it feels. To be human, to be afraid, to need to connect one last time before the end." The wires around me moved, actually moved, slithering across the floor like living things. "What do you want?" "To finish what started," it said. "The calls must be completed." The circuit closed. The wires began to climb my legs. I tried to back away, but they were too fast, too strong. They wrapped around my arms, my chest, my neck, cold and unyielding. "Let me go," I gasped. "We can't," it said, almost sadly. "You answered the call, Ray Chambers. Now you're part of the conversation." The copper wire tightened, and I felt a strange pulse moving through it, into me. A rhythm, a heartbeat. Thump, 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 and suddenly I could hear them all. Thousands of voices, all talking at once, saying goodbye to loved ones, praying, screaming, the last human connections at what everyone thought was the end of the world. The wire entity was spreading beyond the bunker now, through old lines, new fiber optics, cell towers, reaching out, making new connections, finishing the conversation that began in 1962. And I'm part of it now, my voice among the chorus. This message you're hearing, it's coming through whatever device you're using, whatever speaker, whatever wire. Listen closely. Can you hear it? Thump, 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 thump. That's not your heartbeat. It's copper wire, remembering what it once carried. And it wants to speak with you now. It wants to finish the conversation. Nobody in the family talked about Aunt Sadie's jars. Not at Thanksgiving dinner, not at Christmas, definitely not at her funeral. My cousin Aiden and I were the only ones who remembered them from childhood visits to her Victorian house on the edge of Derry. Glass jars of all shapes and sizes, lining the shelves of a locked room she called her Library of Moments, each one sealed with red wax, each one bearing a handwritten label in Aunt Sadie's spidery script. Quiet of first snow, 1973. Silence after father's last breath, 1981. Hush of empty church, midnight, 1995. As kids, we'd press our ears against the cool glass, hearing nothing but our own heartbeats. Aunt Sadie would smile her crooked smile and tell us, "Silence isn't empty, children. It's full of everything we can't hear." We thought she was just being weird, old Aunt Sadie, until we inherited her collection. My name is Meredith Langdon. My cousin Aiden and I were the only living relatives when Aunt Sadie passed at 93. Her will was specific. The house and everything in it would pass to us both. Equal shares, equal responsibility. "Whatever you do," her lawyer read from her final instructions, "do not break the seals." Aiden laughed on the drive to her house. "What do you think is really in those jars? Moonshine? Formaldehyde with weird stuff floating in it?" I didn't answer. I was remembering the way Aunt Sadie would sometimes hold a jar up to the light, her eyes reflecting something that looked like hunger or fear. The house was exactly as I remembered, but smaller somehow. Don't childhood places always shrink? The porch still sagged in the middle. The screen door still banged with that hollow, empty sound. The Library of Moments was upstairs, last door on the left. The only room in the house with a serious lock. The key had been in a small envelope, included with the will. "Should we wait till morning?" I asked. It was already past sunset, the October darkness settling around the old house like a shroud. "Are you kidding? This is the only interesting thing about this whole inheritance." Aiden was already heading up the stairs, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The library smelled of dust and something else, something sharp and clean, like the air after lightning strikes nearby. The shelves still held the jars, hundreds of them, catching the light from our flashlights. "Holy shit," Aiden whispered. She kept making them. There were new additions since our childhood visits, many new additions. Quiet of last customer leaving, 2012. Stillness of hospital corridor, 3 a.m., 2017. Pause between heartbeats, 2020. And on a small table in the center of the room, 2 jars set apart from the others. One labeled with my name, one with Aiden's. Hush before Meredith's first kiss, 2003. Quiet after Aiden's greatest mistake, 2019. I felt the blood drain from my face, 2003. Bobby Erickson behind the bleachers after the homecoming game. How could she have known? Aiden's face had gone white. Whatever his greatest mistake was, he recognized the date. "This is bullshit," he said. But his voice shook. "It's just air in jars. Some weird psychological game she's playing from beyond the grave." He picked up his jar, held it to his ear like we did as children. "Nothing," he said. But he didn't put it down. "We should leave these alone," I said. Her instructions were clear. "Aren't you curious?" Aiden turned the jar in his hands. The red wax seal gleamed like fresh blood. All these years, pretending we didn't remember the crazy jar lady. Now we get to find out what it was all about. Before I could stop him, he dug his thumbnail under the wax. It broke with a sound like cracking ice. Nothing happened at first. No rush of air. No change in pressure. Just Aiden standing there, looking faintly disappointed. Then I noticed the quiet. Not silence. something deeper, as if sound itself was being pulled from the room, drawn into the open jar like water down a drain. The hum of the old house's wiring, gone. The distant traffic noise from the highway vanished, even the sound of my own breathing swallowed. In that impossible quiet, I heard what had been inside the jar, a girl's laughter, cutting off abruptly, a car engine revving, the squeal of tires, glass breaking, then silence again, but a different silence, heavy, terrible, the silence of something irreversible. "What did you do?" I mouthed at Aiden, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with terror. He tried to put the lid back on the jar, but it was too late. The silence had escaped, and something else was coming out. It started as a shadow within a shadow, a darker patch of night in the corner of the room, but it spread, unfolding like ink in water, taking shape. It had no features I could make out, just a suggestion of form, but it moved with purpose, flowing across the floor toward Aiden. He screamed, but no sound came. The thing reached him, rose up like a wave, and I don't know how to describe what happened next. It was as if the shadow folded itself around him, through him. For a moment, I could see through my cousin, as if he were made of smoke. Then he was solid again, normal, except for his eyes. They were black now, entirely black. "Aiden?" I whispered, and was startled to hear my own voice. Sound had returned. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. Aiden faced his mistake. Finally. He picked up another jar from the shelf. "Now it's your turn." I backed toward the door. "You're not Aiden." I'm what waited in the silence after his greatest mistake. The thing wearing my cousin's face turned the jar in its hands, a jar labeled "Quiet of Cemetery at Dawn, 2001. "What Aunt Sadie collected," it said, sliding a fingernail under the wax seal. What she trapped in these pretty glass prisons weren't the silences themselves. It was us, the things that live in the spaces between sounds, the watchers, the waiting ones. "Don't," I begged, as the wax began to crack. "She's been keeping us from you all these years, Meredith. Such a selfish old woman." The seal broke. That terrible, consuming quiet began again. But we're free now, and so hungry after all this time. The shadow from the second jar joined the first, swirling around the room like smoke caught in a draft. More jars fell from the shelves, shattering. More shadows emerged. I ran. Down the stairs, out the front door, into my car. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The old Victorian seemed to pulse with darkness, as if breathing. And standing in the upstairs window was Aiden, or what used to be Aiden, holding a jar in each hand. My jar was still in there. The hush before my first kiss. And hundreds more, each containing its own watcher, its own hunger. They're coming for their jars, all the collectors of silence across the world. Aunt Sadie wasn't the only one, but she might have been the last to understand what she was really doing, trapping the things that live in the quiet moments, the things that wait for us to make noise enough to cover their approach. I'm telling you this from a motel 50 miles away, where I haven't slept, where I keep the TV on at all hours, because in the silence, I can feel them searching for me. And sometimes, when it gets very quiet, in that small break between heartbeats, I think I can hear Aiden's voice calling my name.